In the beginning there was only chaos, nothing but the expansive primordial abyss. Then 3 golden goddesses descended upon this chaos and changed it. The goddess Din created the physical structures of the planets and the land and red earth they're built on. Goddess Nehru created the laws of the universe, like time and gravity. And Fëanor, goddess of courage, created life itself to inhabit the lands built by Din and adhere to the laws of Nehru. Fëanor may be known as the goddess of courage, but really, she is the goddess of life itself. Welcome to Hyrule History, and today we begin a multi-part series looking at the gods and deities of Hyrule, beginning with the golden goddess Fëanor. Fëanor appears in every single timeline, but first it would be good to get into who Fëanor is a little bit more generally, seeing as so far in Hyrule history, we've only really covered races and enemies, and a goddess is just a little bit more important. Much like any real-life society's gods, Fëanor is portrayed differently across different cultures. We have 3 examples of physical depiction of Fëanor. We see her in the Great Deku Tree's retelling of the creation myth in Ocarina of Time, and we see her in statue form in both Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. This means the only timeline without a depiction of Fëanor is the Decline timeline, which goes along with the atheistic theme the timeline already has going for it. Fëanor first appears in Ocarina of Time as a golden being surrounded by green energy or aura. She has a slender frame and long hair, but is nondescript other than that. It's unknown if what we're seeing is the actual creation of Hyrule, or if it's an imagining based on the Deku Tree's retelling, but this is the closest we have to what Fëanor would actually look like. In the Child timeline, we can interpret what the Hylians would imagine Fëanor to look like thanks to Hylian society in Twilight Princess, specifically thanks to the statue built of her as well as the other goddesses in the throne room of Hyrule Castle. The monument is of the Triforce with the 3 goddesses circling around it. The goddesses are all identical, but we can make an educated guess that the statue on the right is Fëanor. She's gripping the right piece of the Triforce, which is most often identified as the Triforce of Courage, which of course is Fëanor's piece. Regardless, she is here identified as having long hair like the Ocarina of Time version, with a piece of jewelry across her forehead. She's topless, but she does have a long, flowing skirt and is also slender in frame, similar to the Ocarina of Time version. In the Wind Waker depiction within the adult timeline, we find another statue of Fëanor. However, this one is certainly unique. Unlike the Twilight Princess statue, all 3 goddesses are depicted very differently in their statue forms, with the only common denominator being that they are all holding up goddess pearls in the exact same stance. Fëanor is depicted as a young girl with a long dress and forehead jewelry matching the Twilight Princess depiction. However, her hair is tied up and appears shorter, as well as with the addition of some sort of flower hairpiece. So the commonalities between all of her portrayals is that she is slender and youthful, but most everything else varies. Fëanor is the goddess of wind, courage, and life itself. She created all life on the earth, including plant life, so she also tends to be the patron goddess of forests and the races that dwell within them. That's why many forests in the different versions of Hyrule have been called Faron, either indirectly named after Fëanor, or named after the dragon Faron, who was in turn named after Fëanor. Due to her association with forests and life, Fëanor is often associated with the color green. In fact, the mark of Fëanor, 2 crescents overlapping a circle, is usually portrayed green as well. After leaving the newly created planet behind, Fëanor leaves part of her essence in Hyrule, known as the Triforce of Courage, one piece of 3 that makes up the wish-granting Triforce. The Triforce of Courage is usually the right piece and grants the user exemplary bravery and some level of protection from evil magic. The Triforce of Courage is almost ritualistically granted to or found by the reincarnation of the spirit of the hero. Possibly because some part of her exists in the physical realm, Fëanor's essence can be called upon to cast the powerful spell Fëanor's Wind. It creates a mighty gust of wind that carries the user from one waypoint to another, acting as a type of teleportation spell. Fëanor is one of the golden goddesses, the 3 goddesses who came together to create the universe and thus Hyrule, and therefore she is relevant to every single timeline. However, she also has a more specific relevance to the individual timelines as well. Before anything else though, we have the creation myth of Hyrule, which obviously precedes everything else. The creation of the universe takes place in the very first era of Hyrule, known as the Era of the World's Creation. As previously mentioned, the universe was created by the 3 golden goddesses. This golden distinction is important because it separates them from the other gods and goddesses such as Hylia or the goddess of time. So before anything else existed, the 3 golden goddesses descended upon chaos and set to work creating order. The goddess Din created the physical world, and Nehru created the laws of the universe. Faeror was tasked with creating life to inhabit Din's Earth and adhere to Nehru's laws. She created everything alive, from plant life to the first creatures. After finishing, Faeror created 3 mighty dragons to protect the various regions of the world that the 3 of them created: Eldin the Fire Dragon, Pharon the Water Dragon, and Lanayru the Lightning Dragon. Their work done with Hyrule, the 3 goddesses also created the Sacred Realm as a secure realm outside of Hyrule. With this, they left, combining their essences to leave behind the mighty Triforce resting in the Sacred Realm and being protected by the minor goddess Hylia. With this, the Golden Goddesses departed to the heavens. Faeror was the last one to leave. Over the course of the era of the goddess Hylia, a great battle was fought over the Triforce, with very little to no influence from Faeror or any of the other golden goddesses. Eventually, the evil being Demise, who is fighting for the Triforce, is temporarily sealed away, and Hylia creates the eternal role of a hero to rise up against the forces of the descendant of Demise. This is important to Faeror because she represents the Triforce of Courage, which would be the piece of Triforce given to the chosen heroes incarnate whenever he arises to fight the descendant of Demise. Time passes and we enter the Sky Era, during which the first known descendants of the hero and the goddess Hylia awaken, Link and Zelda. They begin their journey to seal Demise away once again. A ways into their journey, Link encounters the Isle of Songs. Here he can learn 3 songs named after the golden goddesses. The first song Link learns is Faeror's Courage, which is used to teleport to Faron Woods, where the dragon Pharon protects the sacred flame known as Faeror's Flame. Once Link arrives at Faron Woods, a portal to the Silent Realm opens. The Silent Realm is a realm containing challenges meant to test the spiritual growth of the hero. There is a Silent Realm for each goddess, and Link encounters Faeror's realm first. He proves himself by finding 15 tears of Faeror, and he receives a dragon scale which he uses later in his journey, which ultimately results in the resealing of Demise. After Demise is resealed, time passes and we reach the Era of Chaos, followed by the Era of Prosperity, and then the Force Era. A great war is once again fought over the Triforce, and it's ended in the sealing of the Sacred Realm, followed by a period of peace that gives rise to Hyrule Kingdom. Faeror had little influence over these turbulent times, however the people still believed in their goddesses, as evidenced by a girl working for an inn being named after the goddess in Minish Cap. After more time passes, we eventually reach the era of the Hero of Time, when the Great Deku Tree tells a new reincarnation of Link the story of the creation of the universe, and thus the Triforce. Link also gains the ability to harness the power of Faeror for the first time, when he gains the powerful teleportation spell, Faeror's Wind. At this point, we've reached the timeline branch. Let us begin with the Decline timeline, which I've called the atheistic timeline. I don't mean that the people don't believe in their gods, because they obviously still do. What I mean is that the gods seem to have more or less abstained from any sort of influence or interaction with the Decline timeline, as you'll see. If Link is defeated by Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time, it leads to an event known as the Sealing War, followed by the events of A Link to the Past. Ganondorf manages to fight his way to the Sacred Realm, and use the power of the Triforce, which is partly the power of Faeror, to wish himself as the ruler of the world. They grant him this, but he was eventually sealed into the Dark World, and was ultimately defeated by Link during the events of A Link to the Past. Faeror doesn't appear directly in A Link to the Past, but is indirectly involved in 2 instances. First, the manual refers to a god of courage being involved in creating the world, which is obviously Faeror. Secondly, the game also ends in Link using the power of the Triforce to revert Hyrule to its pre-Ganon state, thus using some of Faeror's power. Faeror is also not featured directly in A Link Between Worlds, but once again, the Triforce of Courage is featured prominently, so there is an indirect connection. Moving along, Faeror directly doesn't appear in any of the Oracle games, but her namesake does appear as the Oracle Faeror in both games. If Link starts a linked game in either Ages or Seasons, he will be told secrets by various people in the game. He can then bring those secrets back to the Oracle Faeror in return for unique items. From then on, the rest of the Decline timeline passes by with very little to do with the gods directly. The Decline timeline is a sad timeline in many ways, but the godlessness of it really does add to that feeling that this timeline is sort of forsaken, especially compared to the interactions of the goddesses in the other 2 timelines, who both have major events shaped by direct interactions with the goddesses. The Triforce itself appears more prominently in the Decline timeline than in any of the other ones, but maybe it's because the goddesses themselves seem so hesitant to interact with their people. So, moving back to the timeline branch. If Link is victorious over Ganon, the timeline splits in 2, causing causing either the Child Era or the Adult Era. During the end of Ocarina of Time, Link returns the Master Sword to its pedestal and returns to his child self 7 years in the past. Child Era timeline continues from this point as Link leads us through the events of Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask takes place in the alternate dimension of Termina and has no instances of Faeror, as the only goddess really mentioned in the game is the Goddess of Time. However, Faeror is active in the next game in the timeline. Many years pass after Ganon's arrest and banishment to the Twilight Realm, and eventually we reach the events of Twilight Princess. It's revealed that at some point in Hyrule's history, an event known as the Interloper War took place, in which many groups across Hyrule went to war with one another over the location of the Sacred Realm and the Triforce within. The tribe known as the Dark Interlopers came close to establishing domination over the Sacred Realm, but direct involvement from Faeror and the other goddesses thwarted them. 3 spirits of light were in place to protect the light that sustained Hyrule. These beings were likely descended from the ancient dragons that Faeror created to protect the Earth originally. Faeror and the other golden goddesses directly commanded the spirits of light to seal away the Dark Tribe's power into the fused shadow, and to seal the actual members of the Dark Interlopers into the Twilight Realm, a parallel realm to Hyrule. This was direct influence by Faeror and the other goddesses. So the rest of Twilight Princess takes place, and the remainder of the Child Era timeline, as explored, takes place in the Shadow Era, in which Faeror is not directly mentioned, although Four Swords has a wind temple which could possibly have been built in honor of Faeror, but nothing is certain. This brings us to the Adult Timeline, the timeline with perhaps the most direct involvement by Faeror. After battling and defeating Ganondorf at the climax of Ocarina of Time, Link returns the Master Sword to its pedestal one last time and teleports back to his childhood, just like the Child Timeline. However, this also meant the timeline that Link was leaving no longer had a hero around to save it when Ganondorf made his inevitable return. After many years of isolation, Ganondorf manages to break out of the Sacred Realm and resumes his conquest of Hyrule. He makes quick work of this as Link isn't there to stop him, and the people of Hyrule have nobody but the gods to turn to. Faeror and the other gods directly intervene in a very biblical fashion. While the gods interfered in the Child Timeline through their agents, the Spirits of Light, in the Adult Timeline they take a much more hands-on approach. Faeror and the other goddesses warn many of the inhabitants of Hyrule to flee to the mountaintops, and they then proceed to unleash a torrential flood of such strength that it floods the entire known world, and is thus known as the Great Flood. The Golden Goddesses succeed in trapping Ganon and his minions underneath the waves, but there's the drawback of many races either being wiped out or forced to adapt, and civilization as a whole in need of starting over. Even this is only a temporary measure against Ganondorf, however, who finds his way to the surface and deigns to unsink Hyrule and rule over it once again. Thankfully this time, the spirit of the hero does manifest, and a new Link quests to defeat him. Interestingly enough, this version of Link hails from Outset Island, an island said to have been specifically blessed by Faeror. Link eventually is required to raise the fabled Tower of the Gods, requiring for him to find the Pearl of Faeror and bring it to the statue bearing this Hyrule's interpretation of Faeror's likeliness, found on Eastern Triangle Island. Once this is also done with the pearls and statues of the other 2 goddesses, the Tower of Gods rises from the sea. Defeating the challenge inside, created by Faeror and the other goddesses to test the hero, creates a portal to flooded Hyrule. This incarnation of Link learns that he is the bearer of the Triforce of Courage, embodying the power of Faeror. Link reassembles the scattered Triforce pieces from pieces scattered across the Great Sea. He goes on to defeat Ganon yet again, and brings peace to Hyrule once again. He then goes on to be part of a group that finds a new continental landmass, which appears to be ruled over by gods that are simply known as Spirits of Good. How these gods relate to the Golden Goddesses is not known, but Faeror is not mentioned again in the rest of the Adult Timeline. We don't know where Breath of the Wild fits in the timeline yet, but it's hardly relevant as there is only one real connection to Faeror, and that's the dragon Farosh. He is obviously named after Faeror, and he is bound to the Spring of Courage, further connecting him to Faeror. Other than this, Hylia is the primary goddess mentioned in Breath of the Wild, not Faeror or any of the other golden goddesses. By far, the most hotly contested theory involving Faeror, as well as the one with the most weight behind it, is the idea that Faeror is also the consistently mentioned Goddess of Time. Of all the lesser goddesses not named Hylia, the Goddess of Time is by far mentioned the most, and there is competing theories between whether the Goddess of Time is Nehru or Faeror. It would, at first glance, appear that Nehru is obviously the goddess of time because she's the creator of universal law, and time is certainly a law of the universe. This is a very compelling argument, and we'll be delving further into it with a video on Nehru. However, there is a case to be made for Faeror as well. The connecting tissue between Faeror and the goddess of time is twofold: Link and the fairy Seela from Phantom Hourglass. Let's start with Link. Link often has the ability to control time, be it through the use of the Harp of Ages or with the Ocarina of Time. Link is associated with time travel. Furthermore, Ocarina of Time Link is specifically known as the Hero of Time, further creating an association with Link and time. If we agree that Link has a close association with time, then we can bring up the fact that Link is also closely associated with Faeror. He is, after all, the holder of the Triforce of Courage, which is the piece containing Faeror's essence. In Ocarina of Time, he lives in a forest, and forests are associated with Faeror. In Wind Waker, he was born on Outset Island, which was an island that was blessed by Faeror. So, if we can agree that Link has a close association with time, and if we agree that Link is closely associated with Faeror, then it stands to reason that we can connect the two and say that Faeror is closely connected with time. That alone may be unsatisfying, so we'll turn to the second piece of in-game evidence, that being Seelah the Fairy. In Phantom Hourglass, the alternate world the game takes place in has three deities, known as the Three Spirits, that mirror the goddesses of Hyrule. There is a spirit of power, a spirit of wisdom, and a spirit of courage, just like Hyrule. Seelah, the fairy that accompanies Link through the game, turns out to be the spirit of courage, that world's version of Faeror. Most importantly though, she is revealed to be the spirit of courage and time. Your counter to this could be that the world of the Ocean King is a parallel world, and thus doesn't really count towards Hyrulean canon, but my counter-argument is that if that was the case, we would also have to throw out everything that's mentioned in Majora's Mask, which is also a parallel world. So maybe one of these was enough to convince you, maybe both of them together was enough to convince you, or maybe neither of them convinced you. That's fine. Like I mentioned earlier, once we get to the video on Nehru, we'll be going over the argument that she is the goddess of time. Faeror is a fascinating goddess in her own right, and her ties to Link make her possibly the most important goddess, in terms of the constant reliable defeat of Ganon, or any other reincarnation of Demise. Her creation of life and courage gives her a unique place in the pantheon of Hyrulean gods, and she goes down as my second favorite goddess. I bet you can't guess who my favorite is. Thanks for watching the first episode on goddesses, and let me know in the comments below who your favorite goddess is, or if you have anything you'd like to see featured on Hyrule History. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.